Hey Jay, how's it going, man?
Hey man, I'm doing awesome, barring the fact that my camera broke. But hey, we're here, we're talking, so I'm in a great mood.
Hey, we're circling back to a good friend of ours from high school who was gracious enough to come on the show about 9 months ago. We published that episode, and when we published it, actually, he was a little ways into retirement. So he had newly retired when we were having the initial conversation. He was about 2.5 months in when we first spoke with him. It's our friend Erik. We grew up together, and he early retired at the age of 49, I believe. Erik has now been in retirement, I think, between 15, 17 months, something like that now. So we have him back on the show to kind of see how he's doing, see how life in retirement is treating him. Erik, welcome back.
Wow, thank you. Thank you. Good to see you guys again.
Good to
Likewise.
And I retired at 49.
49. Okay, rub it in, man, because I'm going for 50. But yeah, rub it in, please.
Jason has us both beat.
Yeah, well, half the fire community has me beat, so I won't brag too much.
Hey, man, one of the great things about being able to check in with you so early on is now we have a kind of point of contrast here. So I guess, my first question for you is really beyond how's it going, and how life in retirement is, because I'm looking forward to that. What's a typical day for you like right now? What does that look like in early retirement?
Yeah, probably not too different since we last spoke. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But I will say this: while my typical day in terms of what I do hasn't changed, how I think about it and how I approach it has changed a lot. And I do credit two sides of five for some of that, and I'll give you both kudos and or whatever the opposite of that is.
What we really deserve.
But just to refresh your audience's memory if they saw the earlier episode, I'm a little different than your traditional fire candidate, right? So I am now 50 years old, but there's two things that are probably a little different than most people in my situation, or certainly the two of you. Which is one, my wife still works, right? She works a lot less. She is basically barista firing. I've retired, so she's working effectively half time.
Okay.
And wants to keep it that way, right? And it's not necessarily for a little bit for financial reasons, a little bit for fulfillment reasons, sort of a little bit for other reasons as well. But I'm also a very old dad. Right. So I have a 6-year-old or 6.5-year-old and a 2.5-year-old. So my day is really spent a lot around the kids. Uh-huh. Right. And so, even though I retired and even though my kids go to daycare and preschool and kindergarten and soon to be first grade, I'm not a stay-at-home dad in the traditional sense. I'm effectively a stay-at-home dad. Yep. My wife works in the emergency room, and so she works nights, she works weekends, she works holidays. So there's a lot of time where it's me and two little kids, and I'm just trying to get through the day. Right. So today, no different than it's typical day, which is wake up, get the kids dressed, get the kids fed, get them we're in summertime now, so instead of getting them off to school and preschool, it's getting them off to preschool and summer camp. Uh-huh. It will be getting my kids from summer, instead of getting my kids from school and taking my son to karate, it'll be taking getting my kid from summer camp and taking him to karate, getting my daughter from preschool, right? Bringing them home, playing with them, dinner, bed, bedtime. The whole bedtime routine.
I remember these days so well.
Yeah.
Yes, right. And so
that's right. But I mean, despite the challenges that come with that, the awesome side is you're getting to do something that, freely admit, I didn't choose to do. I worked and I traveled a lot when my son was little, and that means I kind of missed a lot of those things that you get to do. So the karate drop-offs and things like that I'm sure they add up like for any parent, but it's also super cool that your retirement decision enabled you to do that, which I know you wanted to do.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things we talked about last time was I was trying to find my purpose, and I think that's what I spent a lot of time this last year, or a good part of this last year doing, or since we last spoke, was trying to find my purpose. And I kept thinking okay, I've got all these distractions that take up a lot of my time, but I haven't found my purpose in retirement. What's my purpose? I don't have I'm not really someone who has a hobby or looking to get a new hobby.
Right.
And so I was investing all this time into my kids. We have We were about to start a remodel last year. That's now in full swing. You can't see it, but there's a good part of my house that doesn't exist right now.
Oh,
outside that door, right? So, anyway, long story short, I was like, oh, what's my purpose? I spent a lot of time trying to figure this out. And I'm like, should I go back to work? Should I do some consulting work? Should I volunteer? So one, I do a lot of I do a decent amount of volunteering with my kids' schools, right?
Okay. Yep.
And that's been fantastic to obviously just spend more time with my kids. But where it's really paid off is this, which is I did it with this intent of making I selfishly did it for my son, volunteering at my son's school to, volunteer in the classroom, thinking like, oh, hey, one of the best things you can do is lower the, ratio of teachers to students. And I realized I'm not really a teacher, but if, hey, I can take 4, 5, 6 kids, whatever, and lower the ratio for the teacher, that would be great. That was sort of my, both selfish and altruistic reasons for doing it, thinking, hey, it'll be better for my kid. That's the selfish reason. And the altruistic reason would be, okay, it's better for the other kid, his classmates. Right. It didn't really matter because my son's school has a plethora of resources. So they do AM and PM kindergarten. So my son was in PM kindergarten, so they shared a classroom. And so the AM kindergarten teacher was usually there and often helped with the classroom. They had an assistant that helped. And sometimes there was another parent in the classroom as well. So I wasn't really moving the ratio that much. And I wasn't, making this like, oh, hey, like I'm cutting the ratio in half. And we're like, what a big difference this is going to make for my son and his classmates. But what it really did was it allowed me to connect with my son better than I would have otherwise, because now I got a lens into what his day was. And so instead of like asking what every parent asks, like, hey, kid, how was your day? You get like it's like, I know what he did at school. And I can be like, hey, did you like doing X, Y, and Z with your friends, Jane, Joe, and Bob? And it just allowed me to ask more pointed questions. I knew what his day was. And so I just had a better lens into that. And it allowed me to connect with my son more than I think I would have otherwise. So I volunteer there. I do some volunteer work at my daughter's school. That's a little less. It's, I was doing, if not daily, certainly weekly volunteer work with my son's school, and probably, maybe about once a month with my daughter's school. So that's really what, my day was, when we last spoke. That's really what my day is now. But where I struggled over this, say last year plus since, we last spoke, was I'm like, well, what's my purpose? And I just spent a lot of time. I'm like, I don't need a hobby. I need something to fill this time between basically like 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. is kind of how I looked at it. And I'm like, I need a purpose, right?
But what was driving that need?
Well, because I got a little bored. Right?
Okay, you got bored.
So
yeah.
I would think like, well, should I go back to work? Should I look for another volunteer opportunity? Should I do something else? Because I'm like, I need a purpose. I'm like, I don't want a hobby. and I think that was probably, that framework you have. I think I would call that the disillusionment phase.
Yeah.
And what I realized was I have a purpose, and I didn't realize what it is. My purpose is my family, right? And I don't need a purpose. That is my purpose. Right. I still have, a couple of hours in the day. And I'll tell you what I miss the most. Like every now and then I think to myself, like, I should go back to work. And when I say that, it's like I have no desire to go back to the Silicon Valley grind. Right. It was not always enjoyable. And I think I focus on some of the positive things that have been avoided in my life. And I think this probably resonates with Jason, which is I didn't have the socialization from work. And so I didn't need a purpose. I had a purpose. Right. I needed socialization.
Yeah.
I had just moved to Sacramento, right? And even though my wife was kind of sort of from here and she has friends here, and so they're my friends, like I left behind my social network in Silicon Valley.
Yep.
Right. And all of a sudden it's like, I spent a lot of time with my kids. And so, I didn't have the normal time for like the social outlets, like in the evenings or weekends where you might just typically socialize. Right. And so when I think I'm like, oh, I should go back to work, what I learned was like, I'm not going back to work. At least not a full-time job, not a Silicon Valley grind job. I don't think so.
So how did you sort that out? I mean, a lot of people experience that as they see their, kind of work connections fall off, whether they move or don't move. But, now you're saying, well, I'm realizing I'm needing something. So coming to that is one thing, but then what do you do?
What do I do about it? Yeah. So what I have started to invest a lot more in relationships, like physically invest. So what I started doing probably about 6-7 months ago, and I do this about not quite once a month. I find a day, usually I find a weekday where my wife is not working, and I go to the Bay Area for the whole day. Like I leave first thing, I drop my kids off, and I drive to the Bay Area, and I get a whole schedule. You try and see 3 different sets of friends within a day. Like I will schedule time to go see somebody for lunch. It's usually when I get to the Bay Area, right? I'll have lunch and ideally hang out with them for a little bit afterwards. Again, this is the harder part, is try to find somebody in the mid-afternoon, usually working folk, who can take a couple hours out of their day to catch up. And then I will try and meet up with some other friends, in the evening. And I do that about every 2 months now. And so I try to, and I try to see different people each time I go. Sometimes, maybe I see the same people just because of availability, or I'm a little closer friends with they are. But I do invest more in that socialization that I wasn't doing when I first retired, right? So anyway, I think I'm coming out of that disillusionment, or I guess disenchantment phase, and coming into the reorientation phase, right? I found my purpose. My purpose is family. I have found, I wouldn't say a hobby, but I have found time, what to do with additional time. That's volunteer, especially invest, into my kids. And I invest more into my relationships outside my family, right? And that's in particular, like driving 2.5 hours or 4 or 5 hours in a day to go see friends. It's a long day. Like, get up at like 6:30, get the kids off. Sometimes I don't get home until like, 10 or 11, depending on what time I leave the Bay Area. But it's worth it. It's worth it to me to just sort of maintain those friendships and those connections. And, these are good friends of mine, and I like to think they'd still be good friends, but they're not coming to Sacramento. Like, they're working.
I was going to say, it kind of raises the question, like, your local friend network. If I'm just looking at this as an outsider and saying, okay, you moved to Sacramento, but you're revisiting old friend networks, which is totally legitimate, and I understand it. But how do you establish yourself in a community, which ostensibly your kids are going to be growing up in this place, and you are an older parent in this probably circle of friends that you have locally? So how does that work for you? Like, why not spend the time and invest locally? Or are you saying that you kind of do that with the volunteering and you meet other parents that way, and you want to kind of expand the network?
Yeah, it's the latter, right? So no, I'm definitely growing my social network here. And I think I'm doing what every parent does, which is my friends become my kids' friends' parents.
Yeah, right.
Right. And I certainly had, my son's best friend, like we hang out with his parents quite a bit.
Yep.
But again, they are, my typical free time for socialization is Monday through Friday, 10 to 2.
Yep.
Right. Which would normally be filled up with socialization through work. Right. So I have this void to do that. Right. And so while I could certainly try and focus on going to see people I know in Sacramento during that time frame, I'm going to see those people at kids' birthday parties, school events, or just, they're part of our social network already.
Yeah.
So going to the Bay Area is reinvesting in existing relationships to make sure they don't weaken. So I'm doing both, right? I'm trying to grow my network locally, but I want to make sure like I maintain a strong network of my friends, at least the ones that are, physically accessible, right? I'm sure we all, the 3 of us probably all have friends in upstate New York who we'd love to see every now and then, right? But you can't, trips to upstate New York are few and far between.
Totally. It raises also the question, if you're volunteering in your son's school or your daughter's classroom, whatever, what's the line for you having like personal time? Like, do you see that as a need of yours, like for your own exercise? I mean, I want to get into health and, those kind of routines, but how do you draw that distinction?
Yeah, so I was always big on personal time. I believe it's probably one of the, at least for me, one of the most important things for my physical health, my mental health, and being retired gives me that in spades, right? Like if I can get an hour a day right, to myself, I feel like that is amazing. And when you're a parent of small kids and you're working, and especially if you have a spouse that is, maybe working in the evenings,
Yeah.
you don't always get that, right? And so I now have that, right?
Interesting.
And so it's not like I'm making a sacrifice, like I'm giving up my personal time. So even if I'm going to volunteering, right, I still have, that hour and a half where like, hey, I can get to the gym, right? I probably have to be a little more regimented on my schedule. Got to get there on time, to get out on time, to get to volunteering on time. But I still have that me time that has been that's probably been the best thing about being retired.
And over that year and a half, Erik, over that year and a half since you've retired, has the ways you use that free time changed? Do you find yourself trying new things, or how has that evolved, if at all?
Yeah, it hasn't really evolved much. Like I think I said earlier, it's evolved a lot in how I thought about that time. Because early on, I'm like, I need a purpose, I need a hobby, I need to do something, and I'm not I wouldn't say I don't. It's not that I don't have hobbies, but it's like I've never sought out new hobbies, right? Whatever I was doing before, I'm going to continue to do. So I don't golf. I don't know what other typical hobbies would be. That's just sort of the prototypical male stereotype of what one does in retirement, and I don't do that. I guess to say I nothing's really changed in that sense. Right?
Okay.
My day is kind of the same. But the way I think about it is, this is me time. I now have I identify what my purpose is. It's not like, oh, I got to go take my kids to karate or to gymnastics or to swim lessons because this is just what fills my day, and I got to find something outside of that to fulfill me, right? Because I think that's how I looked at it before.
Okay.
There's something missing, and I have all this other stuff that's like distracting me from what's missing.
Right.
And
Okay, I get another question because you don't have hobbies. It's pretty clear that you became more comfortable sooner than I did talking about being retired, but I'm curious, especially as you meet new people through the school or however, how do you talk about your current status, and what kind of questions do you find yourself fielding, and how has that gone?
I'm either just lucky or have a passive aggressive, more passive aggressive network than you do, which is I from the get go, I embraced it, right? I flat out said, I'm retired and I'm loving it. It was never like, oh, do I say I'm a consultant or I'm, taking a gap year? It was like, no, I'm retired. I embraced it. And I think if you go in with that level of confidence, people there's maybe a different level of acceptance behind it. Right. And I think the other thing is like, also, oh, hey, we as a family are not, hey, we're both fully retired and sipping pina coladas at lunchtime in between picking our kids up, right? My wife still works. So, I think I get a little more leeway there. It's like, oh, you're retired, but you're really effectively a stay-at-home dad.
Got it.
I'm like, yeah, I am kind of, sort of, but not really. But if, you're not going to, give me as hard of a time about me saying I'm retired because of that, great. So I've embraced it. I really haven't gotten too much, or any negative comments, or I haven't heard
That's awesome.
Where I do still struggle with, and this resonated me with when I was watching an earlier episode of 2 Sides of Phi, when I think Erik, it was the second episode that you did with Laura after she had announced, and she was talking about like some of the challenges she had, and I think this was one of the ones that really resonated with me, which is I still have guilt with my parents, talking about me being retired.
Yeah.
And it's because that is just something so foreign to them.
Right.
It's like they worked, and they worked hard, and they worked late into their lives, and to do something like this, to them, like, feels like almost financially irresponsible, or at least we're not a family that talks a lot about our emotions, so I've never really had like an open, long discussion with my family or with my parents about that. But that's certainly how I feel, right? And I'm pretty sure that's how they think. Yeah. Which is like, oh, well, you're 49 and you're retired, like something like you're lazy or you're doing something wrong or something. what's wrong with you?
Right.
And I don't think they think that way anymore, but and again, I never really had that conversation with them. I'm probably not about to, but I had that guilt, and now I've gotten more and more comfortable about it. I think my parents have probably gotten more comfortable about it as well. And so, outside of my parents, I didn't have any guilt or like, oh, I should disguise saying, I'm retired. It's like I've embraced it, and for the most part, it's been good. And I haven't really experienced any negative reaction or, oh, that must be nice kind of comments. I think it's all been
one thing for us, Erik, has been this, and maybe this kind of speaks to that point a little bit, is feeling the need to justify the decision, whether it's to your parents, to your friends, to a larger network, coworkers. And I don't know how you feel about this or how you've adapted to this, but like Laura and I, when we're getting together with people now, and all they do is say, hey, what do you have planned? What trip do you have going on? What activities? Right. When are you going to move? Where are you going to move? And it's like all of a sudden the expectation for us, because we're announcing that we're early retired, is that we have to have the next 5 years mapped out to a T and know exactly how we're going to fill all of this open space. And I'm feeling like that's an unexpected pressure for me. Yep. Have you faced that at all? Or is it just because of your sort of special circumstance that you're not really seeing that quite as much?
Yeah, not as much because one, Deb's still working, even though she works way less. And even if she were fully retired, we're still tied to the school year. Yeah. Right? And we're still tied to little kids. I will say this, we have not done any international traveling since the kids were born, and we probably, we've talked about maybe going to Mexico, which is international light traveling, with the kids, right? But I think any long distance traveling is probably off the table for a few more years,
right?
And we're tied to the school year now, right? With my son in school.
Totally.
The one thing that it does do, like we just took a vacation to Colorado to go visit some friends. And this is something, Deb has always had this benefit. I haven't, which is Deb has a little flexibility with her schedule, right? Because it's shift work, right? Mm-hmm. So if she can plan in advance, she can say, hey, I want to front load or back load shifts within a month, right? And so she can easily get a week off, or if it's a long weekend, as long as it's not like a prime holiday like the 4th of July or Christmas, she can usually stack a few days on either side of that and turn that into, a good amount of time off. And so we can travel. So we don't travel more frequently than we would if I were still working, but we can take longer duration trips. Right? You can go like, oh, hey, a long weekend trip is now 5 days instead of 4, because it's like, oh, well, how much vacation time do I have? And, I have this important meeting on Tuesday. I got to be back for it. I probably have to be back Monday night to prep for it, blah, 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 blah. We now have a little more of that flexibility in terms of, hey, as long as we're not too worried, especially in the summertime when we're not too tied to the school calendar, and Deb can plan time off, like, what may be a 3-day trip can now be a 5 or 6 day trip, right?
So do you have any sense from Deb, your wife, whether or not her kind of taste of a slower paced work schedule has given her like a little taste of freedom and would maybe make her say, hey, maybe I don't need to work till age 60. She had a pension benefit, right, that she was working until 60. Has she had any changing thoughts? Like what are changing thoughts in your family, the discussions between you and your wife over the past year?
Yeah, so she will work till she's 60, right? And I think I may have mentioned this. And
you did,
I joked with her
the health benefits
about this last time, which is like, hey, don't decide at 58 and a half you want to retire early, right? Right? Get out now, and we will make it work. We'll scale back our lifestyle, whatever that requires, et cetera. But don't kill yourself till age 58 and a half and be like, there's this huge, for your audience that didn't watch the prior episode, my wife has this pension where there's this huge quantum step up in benefits if my wife retires at age 60.
Right.
If she retires at 59 and 364 days, her pension increases, but at age 60 it ratchets up. So it's.
And are we talking another 10 years? Are you guys the same age, or is she younger?
Yeah, she's not quite 2 years younger than I am. So she's got another 10. She's got at least more than a decade to go.
Yeah. So your kids will be in junior high and high school.
Yeah, so two things, which is one, she's effectively working half time, so she's ratcheting down her hours, which she's working as little as she can to still accrue towards that pension, and still maintain the benefits for that. So I don't see that changing, but I've gotten beyond this, but about maybe 4 or 5 months ago, we've talked a couple of times when I was still sort of going through that disenchantment phase, trying to find my purpose and what am I doing, and maybe I should go back to work. And she's like, no, don't go back to work, right? And I think my wife is probably the biggest benefactor of me retiring early, because I think every fire or no fire community, retirement early, doesn't matter where you are in your finances or your retirement, right? Anyone with kids, little kids, can appreciate this, which is if one parent all of a sudden has more time and less stress to handle sort of the day-to-day operations of a family, right? Pickups, drop-offs, activities, etc. Stress levels come way down, right? Yeah. And so now it's not like, hey, I have a meeting at 8:30. She works at 9, and so therefore she's the later one, so she's got to go do drop-offs. And every parent has had the 2-year-old, because I've got one now, who decides she's going to spend 5 minutes getting into her car seat, and if you try to speed that up, it's going to take more than 5 minutes of getting her into her car seat, right? And so my stress level of like, oh my God, I got to get back for a meeting, we got to go, like, if I put her in the car seat, she's going to be crying. Right now, it's like, okay, if it's going to take 3-4 minutes and she wants to, crawl around my car before she decides that she's ready to get into a car seat, well, my stress level goes down. I'm now the one doing it instead of Deb. Her stress level comes down. And so I think it's really benefited our relationship. And I think my stress levels have definitely come way down just because of not working. Her stress levels have come down because it just sort of removes a lot of that family stress, because when you're not working, dealing with a toddler that wants to spend 5 minutes getting into a car seat is no longer stressful. It's like sometimes it can be fun, whereas if you're trying to get to work, it's not fun.
Right.
Oh man.
And so the natural question, and don't feel like you have to answer this, but it comes up in the fire community a lot when you have somebody who retires first and the other one is 1 or more years later, as is the plan here. I mean, I get that Deb is working half time, but is there ever tension or any, I don't want to say resentment, sounds like such a strong word, but, does it ever manifest in any conversations or kind of, it's tough times when you have little kids kind of running around, and I could see where that could come up.
Well, where it does come up, and it's more like, sort of in the moment is, and I think every a couple that has kids can appreciate this, right? Regardless of whether you're retired or not. One parent has the kids, one parent's coming home from a long day of work, and it's just like, oh, Deb's here. Like, I've been handling the kids for the last 4 hours, and it's so stressful. And she's like, Deb's like, I've been like, dealing with, patients and emergencies in the ER for the last 12 hours. And it's just like, oh, Deb's home. She can take care of the kids. And she's like, she just wants downtime, and I want downtime. And it's just like, oh, okay. But I think that's not so much a fire question more than that. Just a relationship couples question. But I would say like that's sort of the one that would typically, pop up, right? I wouldn't say resentment, but I'm just like, every now and then I'm like, well, I've had the kids for the last 5 hours. You can't take them for the next hour and get them to bed.
I mean, I can say I totally relate to this, man, because, working from home, my studio is by my home. And when my kids were younger, it just made it easier for me to have to step in and take the duties, because you're there, if they're sick, you got to help them, take them to the hospital. It's just easier for that person who doesn't have the same kind of work commitments to take on those duties. And I have to say, for my relationship with Laura, there was a point where I was just like, this isn't going to work for me, man. There has to be a hard boundary. But it sounds like you don't have that.
Well, not anymore. But you brought something up. There's actually another thing that's really helped out quite a bit. That's reduced stress, in our relationship, which is, so that works in the ER and it's shift work, right? And it's busy and it's hectic. And so one of the worst things that you can do as a, and this is probably not just a physician, right? This could probably like for staff and for nurses as well, is call in sick,
Yep.
Yeah.
Because they can't be like being short, like they're already shorthanded. So being even more shorthanded just puts a bigger burden on your coworkers.
Right.
Right. So, and then they, they have the system where the people are on call and they try and bring people in. So one of the worst things you can do is call in sick. So when our kids would be sick and it'd be like, oh, our kids, our son is sick, our daughter's sick, they should stay home tomorrow. If Deb was working the next day, invariably that fell on me, right? Because if Deb was working, it's like, I can't get out, right? And I can always, in the business world, you can always reschedule a meeting for the most part, right? You can always reschedule a meeting. Right? If you're working in the hospital, like it's in poor taste to put that burden on your coworkers. So you don't, unless you are really sick or you have a family emergency, and typically a sick kid is not a family emergency, right? So that fell on me, right? When you have little kids, they get sick a lot more frequently than you think they do, right? Yeah, I'm a newer parent, right? And I'm like, oh yeah, they get sick more frequently than I do because they're around a bunch of other sick kids all day, right? So, and so now, when that falls on me, like all of a sudden, like that stress is gone. That's like, I'm sure Deb had guilt, like, oh, Erik has to take time off of work to take care of the kids. I can't do that. So, again, like the biggest benefactor, I think, of me being retired isn't me. It's probably my wife, or she would say it's her. Yeah. Right. And I think, our collective stress levels have come down. So yeah, I would say there's less resentment now than I think there was before.
Yep.
Right? I will still, my wife came home last night and I'm just like, there's a big U.S. soccer game that I wanted to watch, and started at 6 p.m. Like I can't watch that. There's no way I'm going to be able to watch that and take care of my kids, right? So I'm trying to stay off my phone to not know the score. And she gets home and I'm like, kids are already to bed. I'm like, great, I can watch. But it's just like, if the kids were awake, I'd be like, hey, great, you watch the kids, I can go watch the soccer game. And like, she needs to decompress from after a long day as well. So I think, thankfully, being retired has, I wouldn't say eliminated a lot of that, but has reduced a lot of that.
Okay, it raises the issue here, and we don't actually have to keep this in, but it definitely raises the issue. And I think this was brought up during the first episode. It's like, okay, are you really retired? I mean, you say you're retired. You're retired from your professional career, but I mean, what you're doing right now does not sound like a retired life to me.
Oh no. If it is, then I'm not doing a very fair representation of what my day's like, right? Like, I managed to fill it, but no, I am retired. Basically, 6:30 a.m. to 9 a.m. and from like 3:30 to when they go to bed, I'm on full-time dad duty, and if Deb's not working, we're collectively on full-time parent duty, right? Whether Deb's working or not on weekends. If she's working, then I definitely have the kids for all their activities. If she's not working, I will typically still be the one on point for kids' activities.
Yep.
Because in her view, and she's right, hey, you're off Monday through Friday, right? I'm not always off on the weekends. So, swim lessons, gymnastic lessons, karate, baseball, soccer, whatever.
You're in the thick of it. Yeah.
Play dates. Yeah, that's typically on me, right? And I'm if it's a Saturday, Sunday event, that's typically on me, and I'm okay with that.
How are you healthier now than when you retired?
I am, but I'm nowhere near as healthy as I should be.
What does that mean?
So explain.
Well, meaning like I lost weight after I retired, right? I've always been big. I've always been heavy. But I got really heavy like my last few years of work. And I've taken off 25 pounds since, and that's great. That's awesome. Right? I probably should take off probably at least another 20 pounds, and it's been a struggle to get to beyond that. I go to the gym probably twice a week. Right? And there's Monday to I can always find time to get to the gym Monday to Friday, and I don't. Right? I think part of that is I'm 50 years old. I'm stressed out from having kids all day. Right, the mental energy it takes just to get out the door to go to the gym, let alone the physical energy to go work out.
You got a pool out back, man, don't you?
I do, but it's not a lap. It's not like you can really swim laps.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Just swim in circles a lot. You'll get there eventually.
If you're into water running, maybe you can do that. Yeah.
You gotta get one of those jets in there, make your own lap pool. You
endless pool, man. Yeah, I can hook you up. Yeah, I can specify that for you, Eric.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, he's not taking any new work, but for you, yeah, he'll give you a special deal.
That's an easy one.
For you, my friend, special price. That's right.
That's right, special.
All right, so you're working on the health piece. It's definitely a part of your life, it sounds like. But
it is, right.
It sounds like mentally, though, there's been a big improvement from the stress of working and the stress between you and your wife and caring for the family.
That's what I'm hearing.
That's been a huge
improvement. That's come way down. I think, it really, I was joking about it, but it really crystallized when when my wife said, like, oh no, don't if I have any say in the matter, don't go back to work.
Right.
And I'm like,
which is awesome.
I was very selfishly thinking about, like, oh, my socialization needs, like, hey, like, maybe I should go back to work, which she was very supportive of. But she's like, if my selfish needs are like, we are better off with you not working. And
right.
like, I sometimes don't think of like how it benefits her, like in a good way of like, being a good partner. I think about how it might negatively impact her, but I didn't always think about how it might positively impact her. Right.
Yes.
So I need to also take that into consideration.
So speaking of sort of, mental wellness and the like, now, when you think about money, obviously your situation's a little different. You have a spouse working half time, and I know you're a boglehead, so you're very comfortable with long-term investing, buy and hold. But as the market does its gyrations, you've now been withdrawing for a year and a half. Do you have concerns? Have your feelings on that changed over time, or has it been pretty consistent?
No, it's been pretty consistent, but, and I'm going to put a little asterisk here, right?
Okay.
I think you of all people can appreciate this, which is, one of the biggest concerns everybody has, at least in the fire community, when you focus on like all the numbers, like when you're pre-fire, like, do I have enough? Do I have enough saved? What's my withdrawal rate? And one of your biggest concerns, especially in the first few years, is sequence of, return risk.
Yep. Absolutely.
Right? That, I think, for you, has not been a problem at all. Right. And in the year and a half, or more than a year and a half that I've been retired, it has not been a problem for me. Right? And so when, I joked with Deb, we went through like, every 3 or 4 months we go through a financial meeting. I just kind of walk us through like, hey, here's our finances, here's our budget, here's what we're spending. Here's our net worth, here's what we're tracking towards, et cetera. It's kind of like the State of the Union. The State of the Union is strong, right? And it's just to really keep her comfortable with finances. I think it's hard for her to understand that we have accumulated enough that we don't have to work. Right? We might not be able to live the lifestyle we're living right now if she didn't work at least half time. But, I think just ingrained that you work. But the market has done great over the last year and a half and probably last 4 years for you. And we're doing this addition and remodel, and like all addition and remodels, they're always more expensive than you think. Oh, yeah. Right? It's like, we need a new roof. Well, I didn't plan on that. And it's like, let's put in that extra concrete. How much more is concrete? Wait, what? And so we're spending a lot on a remodel, addition/remodel, right? Not quite 10% of our net worth, but almost. And I joke with Deb, I'm like, by the time we're done spending all this money on the remodel, our house might be worth what we originally paid for it. And I say that jokingly just because, we bought 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, and it felt like it was a very frothy market then. And I'm like, well, we're not leaving for 20 plus years. Doesn't matter whether the price goes up or not, or it goes down or not. Prices haven't gone down yet, right? So, no, there's been no sequence of return risk. So, I in that last financial meeting I was doing with Deb, I'm like, hey, here's how much we spent on the remodel so far, and here's what we're going to spend. And it wasn't just like, here's how much money we've written a check to the general contractor. It's like, here's what we spent on appliances. Here's what we spent on this. Here's what we spent on, we're renting a house around the corner for a couple months. Because we don't have a kitchen or laundry room or a garage right now, and it was sort of like, wait, how much are we spending?
Yeah.
And then, where I tried to get her comfortable, and I'm like, hey, here's where our net worth was when we started this, and here's where our net worth is today.
Yeah.
And it's higher, even though we've spent all this money, and we're still going to spend all this money on a remodel. our net worth is higher today than it was. And if we had if the sequence of return risk, we actually experienced that, we probably would be cutting back on, I know we need a new roof, but it ain't dripping yet. We can probably go a few more years. Let's defer that. Oh, hey, we're going to put in all this extra concrete for the pay. You know what? We got grass, we got dirt. It's fine.
So technically, you are covering living expenses with Deb's salary, who is still working half time, and then you are withdrawing the balance of your life's expenses from your portfolio.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Okay. And I think it's also we have a decent mortgage that we still have to pay, and we still have a daughter in preschool, which isn't cheap. I think once my kids both kids are in school, and this remodel, is beyond us. We'll obviously still have the mortgage to pay. We're not planning on paying that down, even though while it's sizable, it's 3 1/8%. So we're not.
Yeah, that's the upside of buying down 2 years ago, my friend.
I think once we get in, 4 or 5 years in, we'll be a little more in steady state, and we won't have to touch any principal. But I did have to, I wanted to avoid capital gains tax, so I sold more. I sold some bonds to cover the some of these payments on the remodel, right? So which means like any additional contributions, obviously going to go into
buying bonds.
Bonds, yeah, exactly.
Tasty.
Yeah. So yeah, in a perfect world, Deb's salary just covers our living expenses. It's probably, our living expenses right now are probably a little higher. So we're, even without the remodel, we'd probably be digging a little bit into it. But I think, once my daughter gets out of, daycare, then all of a sudden that's $24,000 post-tax. Right now, all of a sudden, that's a nice vacation, or in our world, that's probably like 3 vacations, right? So,
yeah. Hey,
really by our standards.
I want to kind of come back to this purpose vacuum for a minute, because as I transition, I'm going to have a different transition than you, because my kids are now, I'm going to be an empty nester here.
Right. Yes. Congratulations on your youngest son.
Yeah, thank you. But as I think about, that search for purpose for you, and you found it was family, how do you see that changing over time? Because, I'm looking at that for myself saying, what's this going to look like? How do I figure this out? Because, at a certain point, your kids aren't going to need you in the same way they need you right now. And maybe that's looking too far in the future, but I wonder if you've given it any thought.
I have. I can tell you that there's sort of a long-term answer, or a medium to long-term answer, which I think I have solved. And there's the short to medium-term answer where I think there's still a question mark, right? So that in a decade or a little more than 11 years now, almost 11 years, a little less than 11 years, Deb will be retired, right? And now all of a sudden, we're both retired, and I think that puts us in the boat you're more or less in, which is now all of a sudden travel will probably be. And specifically international travel. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It was something we did. I don't know if we did a lot, but it's something we did and very much enjoyed before kids. I think it's something we're both looking forward to doing, once the kids are older, with and or without them.
Yeah.
But that's 11. So 11 years from now, I think that's the answer, which is now all of a sudden it's not me being retired.
Yeah.
We're fully retired. We still have to answer that question.
Yeah.
But we answer that question together, and I think travel becomes a big part of that.
Nice.
But I think in about 3, 4, 5 years time, when my kids get older and a little more independent, certainly my son, now all of a sudden it's not only does he not need me as much, he might not want me as much, right? He wants to be with his friends, he wants to hang out, he doesn't want to be around mom and dad, right? There will be another little bit of void there. My kids are 4 years apart in age, so I probably still have at least, my daughter's 2.5.
Yeah,
so
you got some time, man.
I still got about 4, 5, 6 years, before I really experience that, or maybe more with my daughter. So there's probably a 2, 3, 4 year window in there where Deb will still be working, the kids will be a lot more independent, and then it's what does Erik do with his time now that the remodel is done? By that point, maybe we remodel something else to the house. I don't know. Right? But I don't have an answer for that one yet.
Yeah. We'll be getting senior citizen discounts at that time.
I know.
That's nice.
All right, man. Hey, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate your time coming back on, and congratulations on surviving that first 18 months, whatever it's been, 17 months. And we wish you all the best. I hope we'll continue to check in with you as you move through the disappointment phase and through the reorientation and hopefully into the stability phase at one point.
Yeah. I thank you for having me. I love your show, and if and when I'm back on, hopefully I have a house that has a garage and that actually where the air conditioning actually cools it down.
All right, man. Good luck.
Renovations, man. Yes. Awesome to see that things are going so well for you guys.
Yes, thank you.